Virtually every leader in the health freedom movement talks about the insecurity of the food supply as one of the primary avenues of tyranny. Our family has rigorously sourced our foods for over a decade, and one of our favorite sources is Farm Match. And specifically, if you are in San Diego, Real Food Club PMA. My kids are literally made from their maple breakfast sausage and the amazing carnitas we make from their pasture-raised pork. But from regeneratively raised raw dairy products to the organic potato chips made in regenerative lard, or anything you might get at your local farmer's market, our family's overall wellness and the security of our food lies in the hands of Farm Match and Real Food Club. I am so excited to be sharing about Farm Match and Real Food Club to offer Future Generations podcast listeners 10% off your first order. You can find the code and link in the show notes. Enjoy the rest of the show. Love and appreciate you all. The desire to go off-grid and disconnect from the system was one of the single most important initiatives any household could have. Whether it is growing our own food, becoming sovereign in our energy production and usage, establishing alternative communication strategies, or digging a well and finding the infinity of primary water. About a year and a half ago, our family moved into our new home in North County, San Diego on 3 acres of precious land here in America's finest county. One of the first things we did was hire Food Forest Abundance to design a regenerative layout for our land. From the different trees to plant differing berry guilds and synergistic pollinators, to consulting on alternative energy, collecting our rainwater, and even helping us find our local well guy, Food Forest Abundance and their Freedom Farm Academy has been pivotal in the gradual and consistent evolution of our household towards true sovereignty from the system. They have helped us simplify a very confusing process and helped us create the design of our dreams. It doesn't matter if you have 3 acres, dozens or hundreds, or just a small yard. Food Forest Abundance has something to offer you and your family in your journey to move your entire household off-grid. Use the code TheFutureGen to work with the absolute best in the world, Food Forest Abundance, to create your own freedom farm and get off-grid at a discounted rate. Welcome to another episode of the Future Generations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom, and this episode is probably one of the most enjoyable that I've ever had in my entire life. And in my entire podcasting journey, Sophie and Tim Eng. Sophie is the author of an amazing cookbook called The Nourishing Asian Kitchen. Tim is a West Point grad, just like myself, and they are now a homesteading, homeschooling family who are from Northern California, in the belly of the beast, just up and comers at the time in the tech industry, just as we do in California, in the massive rat race in the system. And now they are homesteading, homeschooling, and essentially Tim is a homesteading realtor, and he's helping families literally achieve their dreams of having their own farms and their own ranches one day. This episode, from being an Asian couple, having multi-generations in their family household and the connections with their heritage, talking about Asian farming as the OG regenerative farming, conversations about West Point, about indoctrination in terms of how we have a leadership institution, the greatest public institution of creating the best followers in the world, to essentially leaving a lasting legacy with their children in terms of transforming that from transactional aspects that they experience in Northern California to recognizing that translating skill sets into their children. When they talked about those specifically, it was so inspiring. They talked about growing their own food, right? They talked about teaching them about marketing and languaging and critical thinking. And they also talked about that their children already have their own website where they make their own salves, their own spices, and they sell them online. And they talked about their life building community by giving into their community. Such an inspiring couple. I felt very, very, very strong kinship with them in multiple aspects of things. We share a common heritage where our families were essentially fleeing the tyrannical measures of Asia at the time, and essentially one of the few families that have spoken up and chose to not comply. If you look at all the statistics, Asian American families have the highest level of compliance to all the things, especially things like vaccination rates, that in the end, they are a blueprint, not just for Asian families, but for all families to literally put your money where your mouth is and build those alternative systems. This episode is so practical. It is so inspiring. And in the end, if you are looking to build your own alternative network of regenerative farming, of all sorts of other aspects of things, look no further. Tim and Sophia Yang, please share this episode far and wide. Love and appreciate you all. Welcome to the Future Generations podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve, do better now, and for our future generations. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Future Generations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom. I have with me two special guests. We're so, in my opinion, connected in multiple ways, so many layers. And I have to say, I love all of them. One, Tim, you're a West Point grad. I'm a West Point grad. Two, Weston Price and Sally Fallon and your cookbook, Sophia. Three, I think I sent you guys a message just how compliant Asian American families are, to all the things that are going on. Plus, you guys were in the trench here with us in California. You guys have made it to the greener pastures out in Tennessee. And I'm excited to get to chat with you guys. I would love for our audience to get to know you both personally and professionally, because I think you guys represent just a blueprint for how to do so many things really amazingly.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stan.
Yeah, Doc. Thank you so much, Dr. Stan. It's such an honor.
So tell me more. Tell me more about all the things. I've read some of your books, Sophia. I know a little bit about both of your backgrounds, but I'd love to hear.
Got it. Okay. Well, the book that you're referring to is the Nourishing Asian Kitchen Cookbook that I wrote last year. Came out. And it was really a documentary of the last 12 years of us being on this journey into food, looking into food freedom, food security for our family. When my oldest daughter was born, I was starting to look into how do I make applesauce, because even back then, in our culture, we just don't cook our fruit.
Yeah.
So it was just through like a Williams-Sonoma cookbook that I was just flipping through, trying to figure out how to make applesauce. It's very easy. But in even one of those books, it said, make sure that you source organic, because your baby's body is not yet developed enough to process toxic and harmful chemicals from the pesticides and herbicides. And I thought, okay, this is just a Williams-Sonoma book. And back then, 12 years ago, shopping at Whole Foods was not as acceptable as it is today in our family and our culture specifically. So I said, fine, I'll shop at Whole Foods, pick up some organic apples. But at what point then can we switch back to the conventional apples that we've been buying and, have her body be developed enough? Well, fast forward 12 years later, we are now farming and growing all of our protein, our vegetables, our fruit, most of them, and realize that our bodies were never designed to process these harmful toxic chemicals.
It's crazy. I was just watching one of my favorite influencers, Dr. Brad Campbell, a good friend of mine, and he was just posting all sorts of things about all the toxins and endocrine disruptors, and like he got super controversial about gender and about like how all these things have a deep impact on how we express so many, just so many of the common things that are just promoted today. And so it's really, really interesting. So I really appreciate you sharing that. That's really
great. Yeah, Dr. Campbell, I followed him at the same time that I had followed you years ago. So he has just the really hilarious memes and his dog.
So what about you, Tim?
Well, we took a very unconventional path. I mean, we're from the Bay Area. I was in real estate, and we really hit the height of our career around 2020, 2021. We were going to Hawaii and thought that was the American dream. We focused on helping veterans. Sophie does loans, and we focused on helping out, doing VA loans and standing up for the underdogs, basically, and helping them, especially in the Bay Area where it's a housing bubble, and
Right.
competing, in multiple bid opportunities and actually winning out because both of us would work hard for those vets. Now, because of 2020 and all the events that unfolded, that really opened up our eyes. And Sophie, I have to credit to you for opening my eyes up a lot, because just like what you mentioned, Dr. Stan, and we're both from West Point, served in the military. I was super compliant with everything. And California just pushed everything too hard. And
Yeah.
that really woke me up. We started farming. We picked up a lot of the ancient, like the traditional Asian farming techniques from our grandparents in the past, which we thought was weird, but actually is part of regenerative farming today. And we wanted to soak up as much as possible. We went out to Joel Salatin's Polyface Farms, took
Yeah.
all his intensive workshops, and we're from the city. We both grew up in San Jose.
Born and raised.
I would Yelp and hire out for all these things. I
Mhm.
was intimidated going into a Lowe's or a Home Depot. I definitely did not feel handy, but we knew out of necessity we needed to grow our own food, and we need to ramp up as quickly as possible. So in the spirit of Silicon Valley, move as quickly as possible. That's exactly what we did. We sought out subject matter experts, and we just drank from a fire hose, and we moved. We went from the Bay Area on a quarter acre where we had some egg laying hens and some raised beds and everything pretty, to up near Sacramento. We got 5 acres. We introduced ruminants. We had sheep, and we had more
So
egg
cool.
laying hens. We bought all the chicken processing equipment because I wasn't sure I was going to lose my job and we're going to become, chicken farmers. And I'm like, if Joe can do it, he made it so easy. Like, we can do it ourselves. But what we quickly realized when we were in California, because we had this we had redundancy, we had solar power, backup generators, and everything, but we were lacking community
Yeah.
and in the legal system and all the laws, and we were homeschooling our kids, and we wanted something that would support us. And we started looking around, and Sophie's been researching. And because we're in real estate, we started looking at a few different states. We took our RV. I'm just giving you like the quick version of
Of
it.
course.
We jumped in our RV because that was the only safe way to travel. We can actually go to a restroom and have I take care of our in-laws too. So just in the spirit of everything. And we scoped out Texas, Oklahoma. We got to Tennessee. And in Texas and Oklahoma, I really wanted those two states to work because that would be an easier transition for me. And I had lined up all these homes with realtors. And East Tennessee, that was on her. And she told me, you know what, hon, East Tennessee, people are just buying raw land and just parking in an RV. And I'm like, that's not appealing for me after we just spent like $100,000 just revamping this, basically, this nice homestead that we had built up, which is on our YouTube, where we go over everything. And it wasn't appealing to me. But by the time I came out to East Tennessee, we essentially did speed dating with the local community. We asked all the tough questions. I got to interview the sheriff, meet the local congresswoman. I just lucked out. It was just a really good weekend where they were all in town there. And we got to ask all the questions we wanted to, and found out there was a lot of transplants that came from the West Coast, from the Northeast. They relocated to where we ended up relocating to. And Sophie has always been a part of Weston A. Price. She's a Weston A. Price chapter leader in East Tennessee.
Wow,
We
wonderful.
befriended some neighbors out here who mentored us, took us under their wing, and we had no plans on becoming dairy farmers. But over the past year and a half, they mentored us and trained us up. And no homestead is complete without the crown jewel, which is dairy cow, because if everything goes to heck, you can feed all your animals, you can feed your family with milk.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
that's the quick version of what happened. And I revamped my business here, and I'm the homesteading realtor. And my bread and butter is helping others escape from the city and suburbia. And now I have the eye because we didn't have a realtor that can look out for 5G towers, for electrical towers, for all these things in addition to land and what's suitable for growing food. And that's exactly what we do. We grow food, and I tend to the animals. I love the animals. And I think that is a way to kind of treat some of that PTSD and whatnot from dealing from the wars and the military. So it's just been really awesome. It's a family affair. We got our two daughters involved. And what I always say on our podcast, on our Call to Farms podcast, is that we changed our definition of leaving a lasting legacy, because back in Silicon Valley, it was all about 401k and your 529s. But here it's all about learning skills, because we quickly realized when we were building our community, they didn't care what our LinkedIn profile was, because that's what it was like in Silicon Valley. How are you doing? Everything was transactional. It was a business opportunity when you go out for lunch and dinner. But out here, it's all about, well, what can you do? How can you contribute? And it's not about throwing money at it. You need to be able to have a skill set and be in community. So that's what we're training our daughters. How do you be recession proof, be an entrepreneur, and build up these skill sets? Because everything, Dr. Stan, like what you were just talking about, like growing up Asian, we were taught the wrong stuff, where it's like, come in, get a good education at some big name university, get a nice stable job, and that's like the American dream. But and there was like this like looking down on blue collar work. But you know what? Those are the jobs that survived during the recession. Those are the guys that are making the more money. Those are the guys and gals that have the skill sets that I wish I had. I wish I could be building stuff. And I'm doing that now. I'm having to do that. And I feel like it's so late. Like I wish I could work on my car or just be super handy around the house. And so we're teaching our daughters that, just do what you're passionate about. And that's all part of our homeschooling.
I love it. I love it. A little fun fact. My grandfather, who's from Taiwan, he had like maybe a half acre in suburbia LA, right behind my brother's middle school. And
Wow.
He grew like all the Taiwanese vegetables, and that's what he did. We go to the farmer's market, and there's a couple young guys from Bonsall, just north of where we are right now. They have a sugarcane farm, and they juice sugarcane. And like when I watch them, they take a machete, they chop it up, and like that's what my grandpa used to do. He's just chop it up, he just shave off the end, and he just hand it to us. We run around just gnaw on that, it's like that, bamboo, like all sorts of like guava, like all of it was just stuff that I remember so like just, it's one of my favorite parts of my childhood. And it was so popular back then that 99 Ranch was what just had opened in our town. And my grandfather had to hire a guard because 99 Ranch would steal his vegetables because they were so rare. Like everything that he grew was so much better than everything else they could source. And he like literally would have to like guard all of that. And so it's also one of the reasons why I was so attracted to your guys' story, because there's so much of it that's just, it's funny how the ancestral principles, it's like coming full circle, right? And like the transactional nature that is the American dream, and you go pull the curtain far enough and you're like, oh wow, the American dream is to plug you into the system and have you be that, that rat in that rat race that there's no winner of. Yeah. And then here you guys are going into East, Tennessee, and you start to remember what it's like to be, alive, and what it is to be a human, and what it is to be in community. And it's thank you for sharing that. It's such a beautiful story. I'm curious, maybe translating that into maybe some of the bigger challenges you see in the world today. Obviously we could go down many paths. You, in a very short period of time, you highlighted many of them. I'm curious, like maybe what are some of the big, problems in the world that are driving you guys today?
Yeah. I think for me, I would say our small farmers are in trouble. From what I'm seeing and from our vantage point, from what I'm seeing in the lending world, from what we're seeing as just like farmers and the cost of inputs and we're just farming for our family, and anything in excess we are gifting and sharing with our neighbors and community members. But the cost of entry into a homestead, a piece of land, is becoming more and more out of reach for a lot of the people our age, our generation, much less the generations following us. You have a lot of people, we have a lot of clients who we're seeing that are entering their retiring age and reaching out to us because now they finally have the finances and the time and the resources, but no longer have the energy to do so. Then you have folks that are our age, younger, maybe in the 20s and 30s, who are really gung-ho, ready to embrace this lifestyle, see the problems in the world around our food security, and not having the finances to be able to fund this. So
Wow.
I think that for me is the biggest reason that we're trying to tell people that we still work full time. And one of that's an intentional thing that we want to do, is that during this time, while we can still work, we want to be able to fund the farm outside of the farm. And the reason being is because any of the abundance that we have from our milk, from our vegetables that we're growing, any of our proteins that we have, we're able to give and gift freely with that abundance. Versus I know that personally, I would start to feel myself holding back if I was starting to weigh the weight of the tomatoes and know how much I would get from this if that was my livelihood. So, that also poses a challenge, because here we are working full time, homeschooling our children, farming, and realizing that, like, as the cost of inputs, the cost of our feed, the cost of hay, non-sprayed hay, and access to that has become more and more expensive. Even in the last 2 years since we moved out here, thinking it would be a lot cheaper to farm versus what we were doing in California, it is becoming more and more out of reach. And so I think that for us, that's why Tim, as the homesteading realtor, and me helping to lend not just on residential, commercial, but on raw land as well, is to help reclaim acres. And we're at several hundred acres of land back to the small farmers and homesteaders, away from the larger corporations, or who we like to say, Gil Bates.
Oh, yeah.
Pig Latin. Was that Pig Latin? No.
Yeah. She talks a Pig Latin to me, and I'm like, what are you saying? But I think it's two-pronged, because there's two things that we looked for when we were going across country, and that was on homesteading, what Sophie was just talking about, but homeschooling as well. And that's really important to us. Coming from the Bay Area, community is so important, because we want to make sure that our children are surrounded by others who are critical thinking, and can be entrepreneurs, and just like, there's a different, because we were very concerned. I'm trying to see where I'm trying to get to. I want to say that I was very concerned about what they're teaching in public schools. And that only solidified our resolve to doing homeschooling. And we wanted to be in a state that would support homeschooling, and California wasn't very supportive on that. And we wanted to be sure that we took a more holistic approach and taking a look at that. I mean, Sophie went to the Capitol Hill in California to fight back regarding some of this. Remember
Some of the bills. Yeah.
To fight
SB
back.
277, SB 276, and just like being there with the other moms and thousands of moms. I took the day off of work.
Thousands.
Yeah. And just realizing that they're going to pass whatever bill, regardless of how much noise we make. They're not listening to us. And I used to think, I had my own preconceived notions of what homeschooling moms or stay-at-home moms were like, and how their children and their families were. So I didn't have like a positive light of that kind of education. But after seeing that, I came home and I said, Tim, we've got to figure out how we can educate our children the way that we want to, like the things that they should be learning. Like however you choose to educate your child or anybody else that's listening here, all power to you. Every family should have their right to teach however. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about, I think, our perspective over the last few years is, you do you and
Yeah.
we do us, and let's just be that way. But when things are imposed on our family that we just are not in alignment with, is where I turn into a mama bear, and it's just not okay. And I think that's very counter to our Asian culture and the way that we were taught to respect authority.
Yeah.
And I have always kind of identified as a black sheep growing up as a young child. I just never really, conformed. And I really do. I'm thankful now for that, because that was one of the biggest challenges, going into boardrooms too, when I was an executive at the Silicon Valley companies, is having felt uncomfortable speaking up at a boardroom meeting and realizing that that was because of the authority and the respect for authority. Because at the table, we're, at least as a Asian female, we're like, to show respect is to not say anything, right?
Yeah.
And so that was something I really struggled with. But when it came to, fast forward to 2020 and realizing that, no, this is not okay. We need to teach our children how to speak up and how to do so respectfully, but not just to comply because someone or an entity is taking on a authority role.
Yeah. So back to your question, then we're concerned about how the future generations are being raised now. And that's our main motivator as to why we are homesteading for our children.
It's a growing movement, and I think it's one of the more inspiring ones that I feel like we are, we're first time home buyers, and so we're really new to just owning at all, and then you don't realize like the laundry list of responsibility, and then you have some land and some acreage, and it's gnarly. It's a gnarly undertaking, and you go from this world where you're like, oh, what do I want to order from Amazon? Because one will get here at 4 a.m. And that's awesome, because I could get it as quickly as possible, this instant gratification. And then all of a sudden, that was one of the most amazing parts of interviewing Joel Saladin. If you guys haven't listened, not you guys, but if you guys listening right now have not gone to that episode with Joel, like he talked about his kind of catharsis, where he saw like a sprig of red clover in a sea of weeds, and he was like, oh, I'm going to win. Like life happened. And then all of a sudden it's polyface. Like I've been following Joel. I remember reading his book, Folks, This Ain't Normal, years ago. And then now it's like, what is normal, right? Oh, normal's just normal, right? Normal like that. And that's something like we've talked about at Future Generations. Like, how about we just #normalize normal, and not all the other chronic problems that we have in the world today, And so I share the sentiments 100%. Maybe I'm just naive and think that I can hang out in California a little bit longer. But at the end of the day, it's like, I think regardless of where you are, this is the blueprint. Like the blueprint is to radically remove yourself and your children and all of your, bloodline out of that system as quickly as possible and as effectively as you can. And you guys are doing a great job of that.
Yeah, Joel talks about, disentangling yourself from the system. And it's been an unraveling throughout the years, starting with like, what item can we start making at home where we don't have to go to the grocery store anymore? And I would say like our grocery budget in California, I mean, this is embarrassing to say, but it used to be up to like $2,000 a month. And it was because just getting access to Whole Foods. And I was the one, like, just to show you the story of like how we've drastically changed our lives. Before we even put in an offer to the home that we bought in the Bay Area, it was just a 1/4 acre. But we saved up for years to finally buy a 1/4 acre in Walnut Creek. And it was, before we even put in the offer, I made sure that Instacart delivered from 4 Whole Foods to our zip code. And because I'm like, I want access to all of the clean organic food within the hour while I'm working. I want it delivered by 5. So when I'm done working, I just go ahead and get cooking. And thinking that was the balance. But you're right. Like, to your point of saying, like, we're in this gnarly world where like we want to still like live traditionally, but want all the modern conveniences. And so now through the community that we have, we rarely have to go to the grocery store anymore. I mean, the only things that we're really buying are things like toilet paper or, like canning jars, for example. But for the most part, all of our protein we raise on our farm, our dairy, like if we aren't growing it ourselves, there's someone else in our community that is. And so we are sharing with them. And there's so much satisfaction that comes from that, and like a fulfillment of like our soul to realize that, wow, this is us not having to buy a sourdough bread from the store because I just didn't have time to make it. Someone else in the community needs our Vietnamese yogurt and wants it to heal their gut. And we can do that for them. Meanwhile, they're also helping heal us and save us time to offer, the sourdough bread. And that's just one thing. I mean, we've got someone who is sharing our no spray hay from his front yard. Essentially, he's got several acres. And he's also buying our dairy, or not buying, but, we're sharing the dairy.
Yeah.
And so like, another person we're literally trading spring water from their mountain for our milk. Like, it's just beautiful.
It is. So we were exactly what you were just saying, Dr. Stan, about instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
We were there. We were in San Jose. And if we can unplug ourselves from the matrix, so can everyone else, because that's what we share.
I got to ask you something, Tim, because I remember meeting Alec on a random post. It was he just interviewed this guy Maj Tor, and it was a post about vaccines and how they affected, specifically Black boys, and the whole SP277, like the whole MMR, the whole Vaxxed movie.
Yeah.
And I just wrote a comment. And Alex saw it, he stalked me, and then he was like, dude, you're a West Point grad, right? And then he messaged me, we end up on the phone maybe 10 minutes later, which I was in a busy day, he was in a busy day, and we broed out for like a good 30 minutes. I was so behind with my patients, but I was like, dude, this is nuts. It's 2020. I graduated in 2000, and I have not known one West Point grad that believes to the degree what I believe. And Alec and I are obviously really great friends now. And then now we're connected because we have this little sub community. I'm curious how that transition was for you, because I don't think there's a bigger indoctrination public institution.
Yeah. I don't even know how to unpack that question.
You don't have to. You don't have to.
I mean? Like, you might get censored here, but I'm just, Sophie did that intro because she was at a Weston A. Price at the convention.
Well, I've been following Alec for a long time as well, and I was like, oh, he's a West Point grad. And I found you, Dr. Stanton. I was like, oh, he's a West Point grad. And I was like, honey, you've got to meet these two guys.
I was like, no way.
Conference together.
I was like, there's no way there's other West Point grads like that.
And health, like.
So it's been really cool to finally, converse with you and with Alex. So I don't feel like I'm crazy and I'm alone here. And coming from an institution where it's supposed to, it is the premier institution of making sure that we fall in line with everything. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm proud that I went. I mean, but then at the same time, like with all the changes that have been going on, it's pretty sad. And
it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. But so I'm glad we've come out on the other side, and that I think God's placed us in a position now where the three of us can help take charge and actually be those true leaders that we went to West Point to become.
Yeah, the leading by example. And then I would just say, like, even in the intro, I was like, oh, he's a West Point grad. I wonder what his major is, because you start to recognize how people think. And when did you graduate?
2005. I was a mill art major.
You're what?
Mill art major.
Yeah. So I could tell that you're like a strategist, right? Like I could tell that you understand the battlefield and the landscape of everything. And it's important, right? It's important because some people, go way the other way and throw all sorts of that kind of old training away. And then I think Alex said to me once, he's like, dude, you're like a full bird colonel. I was like, oh shit, I am. I didn't even think about that, right? Like, because time just keeps going and you don't stop being, like professional in the things that you're trying to learn. And it's going to take people like you that move into this field that, everybody says in entrepreneurship and business that your niche, like how you specialize who you are. is going to be the way that you impact and serve the world in the greatest capacity. And leading by example in that framework is just, I think it's a really, really amazing thing, which makes me very curious if you guys could verbalize like your purpose and mission. Like, what do you guys see like that as?
You want to go first?
I could do it. No, I'm just kidding.
Maybe you should summarize it for us with I think it's multifaceted for me. In the last, after having children and then fast forward 2020, it really is just, bringing moms back home. Yeah. And the funny thing is, I was shouting from the rooftops about breaking the glass ceiling, being a mom in tech and the challenges there and having a seat at the table at the boardroom. The thing is, though, after 18 years of working in tech, I mean, you're replaceable at your job. Wow. And I think coming to that realization is probably very controversial, but realizing that I'm replaceable at my job, but not replaceable at home. I have 18 summers. One of our mentors told us, you have 18 summers with your children. And for whatever that's worth, like, we have busy summers now, but we are creating memories. And I'm like, well, let's take it a little bit further. Why just summers? Why not every day? And so we are very involved. I'm very involved with the children, what they're doing every day. Even our conversations in the car, it's because of my background's in marketing too. And I have my master's in clinical psychology. I'm always breaking things down. Whenever we drive by a billboard, I'm asking them, what do you think they're trying to sell? Who do you think they're trying to talk to? And so these are the things that like we didn't learn in school, but I feel like they're going to need to learn that. But for me, my mission is to inspire moms, even if you're busy work, and we're all busy. And once you're a mom, you just become busy, whether you're working outside of the home or not. But it's just reclaiming that time and that space for you in the home to be there for the children because you're irreplaceable at home.
What's a typical day that you would say you orchestrate or you help craft?
I get up early. I still work as a lender, but also as a marketing consultant. So I get up before almost everybody else does at 5 o'clock in the morning. I do most of my work during that time. Once the kids get up, we are out and doing chores early on. And then we have a breakfast. And again, the breakfast is all of the food that we're making. So it's not hard. Like we have our own Vietnamese yogurt. I usually have a broth that's on the stove when it's busy. They have broth. We've got sourdough loaf that my oldest one is making on her own, and it's got yogurt in there, milk, sourdough. So it really is, it's got sprouted spelt. I'm learning all these things to tie in. Like in our Asian culture, we don't really make sourdough bread, but we're adding the things in that make sense, that's nutritional for us without having to put that much effort in. I think a lot of people think that, like, how are you able to manage a farm and cook from scratch and still work, or how do you still manage a family? Honestly, with fermentation or cooking broths and all the things that are Weston A price, it actually gets better for you over time. If you're cooking your broth and it's going past 24 hours, even better. If you've got the sourdough and it's continuing to ferment on the counter, even better. It's digesting all that gluten, right?
Oh, that's awesome.
And so those are some of the hacks that I'm starting to talk about more. But then, and then we've got schooling, which Tim honestly does a lot of the homeschooling aspect of it. And then in the afternoons, we're back out to do our afternoon chores. We do our milking. We have dinner together. And then once the kids go to bed, we have our second wind and we record our podcast like at midnight, and, we get back to work then.
Yeah. I kind of joke about it, but it's actually true. When we started dating, I told her my goal in life was to be a father, and I just want I want to be a stay-at-home dad.
That's what you said.
I want to be a stay-at-home dad.
I could not have been more turned off, but now
I didn't have to go to West Point to be a stay-at-home dad, but it's so fulfilling now that, just like what she says, I am the main homeschooling parent on it. And I really feel that my mission, I have so much fulfillment of helping others realize the American dream, which was to get home ownership, and then actually pivoting now to growing their own food. So I help my clients find the right property so they
Wow,
can have a farm on it, and then also help consult so that they can turn that dirt in the soil as well.
that's amazing. It's I think the layers are so, and then you could also tie in. It seems like Sophie, your parents are with you. Like that's such a cool like dynamic, right? Because back in the day, I think the average was 4.3 adults per child in a household. And that also in the Bay or in Southern California or any very modernized city is not that way. You're likely outnumbered by your children in many respects. And so how does that play into things with you guys?
I mean, they had lived with us after we had children when they were after they retired. Mom had some heart issues. Dad has OCD and depression. I talked about it in the cookbook.
Yeah.
And that's part of our story. That's when, honestly, when I started looking into food for our daughter, I started to see the positive effects happen with mom and dad as well. Like, honestly, I saw that first because the kids are healthy, right? So you can't really tell a difference. But then as mom and dad started to feel better, I realized, oh, there might be something to this. And then Tim as well, he struggled with eczema. And when we switched over to grass-fed, grass-finished beef, his skin cleared up drastically. But having mom and dad here, as you know, in our culture is a high honor. And taking care of them in their old age. We've designed the farm or the homestead with them in mind. So I literally have the garden right outside the doorstep. So she doesn't, mom loves being out there. She was the one that told me, don't even bother making pho, which is the chicken or the broth, the healing broth. Don't even bother making pho without scallions or cilantro. So she told me this. She's like, I grew up with that. And then she said it enough that I put together a potager garden. So like right outside the windowsill, I learned how to succession plant the cilantro and the scallions. And then as it was ready to harvest, for the first time, I had cilantro in the pho, and it tasted like a world of a difference.
Wow.
And at that instant, I was hooked and didn't realize that our cilantro that we were growing does not taste the same as the cilantro we were buying in the grocery stores. And the same thing with like a homegrown tomato. I mean, once you take a bite into these homegrown from your backyard, the satisfaction, like the realizing like, oh, we can close this whole loop. We don't have to buy this in the grocery store anymore. It just becomes so much more satisfying. And then, being with mom and dad, I hear their stories. And that was one of the things that I had wanted to write this book 10 years ago, The Nourishing Asian Kitchen. But, obviously working and, making money, good money, it just didn't make any financial sense to take time off to write a cookbook. That's not a lucrative business plan. And so now the cookbook is taking off, but I feel like I'm building the plane while flying it. And, but capturing all of mom's and dad's stories during the time that I was writing the book was probably the highlight so far in my entire experience and just wrapping everything together, because the beautiful thing is also having the children learn hands-on with mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, and hearing the stories and tasting the food together. It's just a beautiful experience with them.
I wanted to add.
Go ahead, Tim.
I wanted to add what Sophia was mentioning, because we're just being more intentional with our time. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners are having to have the same struggles that we do. Being a sandwich generation, they didn't teach us this. We thought we just had to prepare for our children and set up our children, but we're actually having to take care of our parents as well. And so taking care of the parents and the children at the same time, the struggle is real. And I'm sure a lot of people have to deal with it. But what Sophie just mentioned, and it's just very beautifully done, the division of labor, you can have a small farm, you can homestead, and everyone, you just meet them at their level, basically. And everyone can contribute to it. And we're slowing down, but not really, because I think we've never been busier doing a whole bunch of
Yeah.
things. Like Sophie
Yeah.
mentioned, a lot of side hustles, but we're actually growing our own food and we're being intentional about our health because food is medicine. We finally are getting that in and having to convince mom and dad too, because they're very more traditional thinking, right, of like Western meds. And we're trying to show them that actually it was a lot of the Eastern meds was correct and having that balance as well. So it's been a journey. It's not been an overnight success. And I don't want for anyone to think that we just did it just overnight. It actually took time. It took preparation, a lot of being very intentional about it.
So many people have asked me what I do to stay mentally and physically resilient in the midst of the unending polarization, fear, and tyranny. Literally nothing has made a bigger impact for me than daily cold plunging. 3 minutes, 37 degrees every morning for over a year now. My friends, I wanted to tell you about the Edge Tub from Edge Theory Labs. Their portable and inflatable tub can alternate between an ice bath and hot tub. I've been regenerating the benefits of cold plunging every day, like better sleep, better focus, and more energy. We have had some really amazing interviews to learn more about cold exposure. But in the meantime, I invite you to check out Edge Theory Labs' website to learn more. I'm also happy to share an exclusive offer for Future Generations podcast listeners, $150 off using the code TheFutureGen. You can find more info in the show notes. Get cold. What's up, FG fam? One of the single best companies whose products have supported the optimal wellness of our family for years is Earthly Wellness. Kate TG and her team have stood for truth, health, and freedom in ways that paved the way for so many of us. They experienced heavy levels of censorship long before it was popularized, and they stood strong and persevered. Their products are clean, cost-effective, and honestly, they work for all ages. From supporting my wife, our oldest, and our little guy, Earthly Wellness provides products that have been foundational for our family for years. We especially use their products right before bedtime. Their Feel Better Fast and other herbal tinctures are some of the best in the world, as well as their amazing Goodnight Lotion, the magnesium oil, are mainstays. I am so excited to be partnering with Earthly to offer Future Generations podcast listeners 10% off your first purchase. You can find the code link in the show notes. Enjoy the rest of the show. Love and appreciate you all. How old are your kids?
8 and 12.
8 and 12. Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. It's we're like in the weeds, right? We have a 4 and a 2-year-old, and we're like, what? Like, what happens? You know, and when do they? And then you read Joel's book, and Joel's like, yeah, there is no in that ancestral way of looking at things, and the farming way, the ranching way of looking at things. There's no human being that's a liability. Everybody's an asset. Everybody contributes. Everybody's a part of the ecosystem. And it's like, yeah, if you create it that way, right? And it's really neat that because that's like a pipe dream of mine. My parents actually moved to Tennessee to live with my sister in Memphis, but they're just living in the city. You know, it's not like they're doing a lot of these things that you guys are doing. And a pipe dream of mine is that they actually move back and that we could be, you know, co-located with them, because I think it would I dream of that. And so I really appreciated that perspective, because I think that it really speaks to my heart and the way that I was raised and the way that I want to honor my ancestors too, you know. And so the fact that you guys have also that as a small blueprint is a beautiful thing too.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds beautiful now. Like the book is doing well. The story is a beautiful story, right? But you're looking at it 12 years.
I'm looking at Tim smile already. I love it.
You know, we've had to endure a lot of hardship, and there was a lot of loss. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are so captivated by the story, because they're like, oh, it's so inspiring. How'd you do that? You know, and it's like, we just went through the fire. Yeah. But that's also, I believe, what, I don't know if this is what your experience is for the both of you, but I would say that's what our parents and their parents did. Like my mom just went back to Taiwan for the first time in 60 years. Like, she's never been back. And I knew that she was going to have the time of her life
not just because she wasn't babysitting, not just because she was on vacation, but because I think she was going to tap into her roots and her heritage and the legacy. And they went to their old neighborhood and they saw a neighbor and they immediately recognized each other and they all cried and they saw long lost cousins. And I think we, very privileged first, second generation, don't quite get that in the American dream because we're so far removed. But that fire, like walking through that fire, I can't think of a time period where my grandparents weren't like neck deep in something that was so much more sacrifice than I think many of us today don't quite get, And so I'm curious what all those kind of things that you guys have at work with, future pace that maybe another 12 years, maybe another several generations. Like, what do you guys envision as that legacy? Like you're saying, like handing off skills versus assets or whatever you want to call it, transactional aspects of things. What do you guys see as the future for you guys?
Well, I'll start off like with our children. We were talking about this, like, do we envision our children being farmers? And I think I would like for them to have the skill sets, but they don't have to necessarily pick up a shovel and be a farmer. As long as they have skill sets and they're confident in knowing that they can do it if need be, then that's fine.